Chapter 7. Coming out of her delusion, Sam somehow spied Natalie and mouthed, "Save me a seat." She then made a run for the bathroom and the solace of a closed stall. Sam's senses slowly came back to her. Twice in one weekend, I'm sitting on a toilet trying to pull myself together. Her peripheral vision noted the comfort of the 4 mint green walls, always freshly painted, never a spot of graffiti. What's the damage? Eyes blurry, head pounding, heart thumping, but not as bad. Still breathing. What is wrong with me? Sam wanted to cry, but strangely, the hot stabbing needles weren't behind her eyeballs this time. She was scared witless, yes, but not particularly nervous. Her stomach was not threatening to lurch its breakfast contents, and she was warm inside, despite the wet chill of the February morning. She was warm inside, sort of like Coco after the Christmas parade, or her grandmother's brownies straight out of the oven. Suddenly she could smell brownies and a hint of Shalimar perfume, her grandmother's favorite. Some old lady must have come in the bathroom, and Sam had been too preoccupied with her self-assessment to notice. They must be baking brownies somewhere in the church for an after-church fellowship. Sam knew if she did not get to her Sunday school room, Natalie would send out a search party. She would have to push what had just happened to that recess in her brain called total denial. She did the final check to see if her legs were in fact working and went to the sink to survey the damage. Not all that bad. In fact, her cheeks had a little hint of summer sun in them. No more talking to your reflection, Sam. When she quietly opened the door of her Sunday school room, Tom Hart had finished his prayer and was talking with the sophomores, catching up on everyone's week. "There's our brilliant reader." Mr. Hart's enthusiasm mortified Sam, but she remembered her manners and said thank you as she ran to the open seat next to Natalie. In her haste to be out of the spotlight, she didn't notice the person in the other seat next to her. Brandon Holiday. "No eye contact, no eye contact, no eye contact. You cannot deal with that right now." But she felt his presence next to her like a bonfire, scorching the left side of her face. "So let's talk about the lesson today." Mr. Hart wrapped up social time and got down to business. Sam focused all the attention she could on Mr. Hart, despite the fact that her left arm was now totally crisp from the flame. She really liked Mr. Hart. He was always smiling and usually had some interesting insight on each lesson. She imagined him staying up all Saturday night studying the scriptures so he could completely be prepared for his teenage trustees. Not that many in the church were willing to tackle the spiritual guidance of high school kids. "Can anyone tell us what a vision is?" Many eager pleasers gave adequate textbook definitions. Sam was starting to breathe a little easier. "Let me read again the beginning of 1 Samuel 3 from my NIV Bible. In those days, the Lord didn't give many messages to his people. He didn't give them many visions. I think Rock used a contemporary English translation, so Sam read dreams, where mine says visions." Sam flinched at the sound of her name. "Why do you think God quit appearing to his people in that time? Why did he quit sending them messages?" Awkward teenage silence. "Brandon, what do you think?" Had Brandon raised his hand? Sam was trying very hard to be very small. "Mr. Hart, in my 1 Samuel 2:12, it talks about how Eli's sons were wicked. It says..." Sam noticed his strong, solid hands thumbing through the delicate, tissue-thin papers of his Bible. "Eli's sons were priests, but they were dishonest and refuse to obey the Lord, Brandon read. Sam sighed. Oh no, had anybody noticed that? She tensed and sat straight up and missed the rest of what Brandon was reading. She had it bad. She knew she had it bad. Being this close to him was just torture. Her heart was pounding, her hands were clammy. How could any guy be that gorgeous and know the Bible too? Before she met Brandon, she would have sworn guys like him didn't exist. She dared glance at his profile. Why not? He was talking, and everybody in the room was looking at him. His chocolate brown hair was thick and wavy, short in the back, longer on top. She could tell how thick it was. Sam imagined how it must feel, like a plush carpet. She would give anything to be able to reach up and run her fingers through it. Now, right now. She sighed again. Her glance inched down his face. His eyes were beautiful. They were a shade darker than his hair. Rich, dark chocolate. She loved chocolate. She really loved chocolate. A little further down, his nose, perfect shape. Not too long, not too big, just right. In his skin, he was fair like she was, but he had a ruddiness to his cheeks, almost like he wore blush with just the slightest hint of razor stubble. Sam bet he could grow the perfect McDreamy 5 o'clock shadow. Finally, his lips, she saw them moving, and they put her in this trance. They were thick Angelina Jolie lips, and the perfect shade of red. Why do all guys always get good lip color? Mr. Hart's voice snapped Sam's head back to the front. She knew her cheeks were red. She hated how she blushed, but nobody seemed to notice. So, if Brandon is right, and God quit sending messages to his people because they were being wicked and not obeying him, does that have anything to do with us today? Tiffany Carter's nasal little girl voice jumped in. Why doesn't God just send us direct messages? I mean, if he did, then we would know what he wanted us to do. Wouldn't that be a lot easier? Tiffany was an idiot. She was one of those perky, overachieving Mansfield High School cheerleaders, and as Sam was noticing Aubrey's friend du jour, Aubrey was sitting beside her nodding her head in agreement. What would either one of them know? The only visions they ever had were of marrying Prince Harry or Harry Styles or any other rich Harry. Mr. Hart went into a monologue about free will and how we wouldn't be free if God told us what to do all the time. We have to make our own choices. The Holy Spirit can direct us, but we ultimately have to choose. He was skillfully weaving the train of thought of the youth group away from Tiffany's dumb question when a familiar voice interrupted. What if God is always sending messages? Maybe he never stopped sending the people of Samuel's time visions either. Maybe it's us that quits listening. Sam would know that voice anywhere. She didn't have to turn around to know Steve was sitting arms crossed, legs crossed, somewhere behind her. She hadn't noticed him this morning. She had been too preoccupied with herself. Steve must be with his mom this weekend because there's no way he would be in church unless he had to be. Steve Cully quit believing in God when they were in the 3rd grade. Sam noticed him leaning against the cold cinder block school building one day during recess. For whatever reason, she had walked up to him and asked him what was wrong, even though she had not even known his name. My mom and dad don't love each other anymore. Even at that young age, he had been very reasonable, matter of fact, no nonsense. How he still approached every problem he faced. At the time, Sam didn't know any kids whose parents were divorced. Mansfield was still a rural Texas community where kids were born, went to school, married, had more kids, and stayed put. People may have divorced, but like her parents and Aubrey's parents, high school sweethearts fell in love, stayed in love, and if they didn't, they surely didn't tell anybody. Somehow things changed. Fort Worth and Dallas grew in on Arlington and merged into one giant, productive, capitalistic machine. People arrived in droves, and so did sports, recreation, arts, culture, name it, and it could be found in the Metroplex. But as the concrete started sucking the life out of soccer moms and stressed out dads, they sought solace north, south, east, west, Plano, Mansfield, Mesquite, Aledo. All these communities felt instant growing pains. People even started escaping Plano to Frisco, Mesquite to Terrell, one suburb to the next. However, Mansfield held tightly to its individualism, or at least tried to. The community leaders desperately clung to the old ways and vowed Mansfield would not turn away from its roots. As far as Sam could tell, they had done a pretty good job, but she was a native. One of the kids of the MHS Teenage Sweethearts, eldest daughter of former baseball standout coach and now vice principal. For a real assessment, she would have to ask an outsider like Natalie or Steve. Then again, Steve was one of those victims of child custody that didn't really belong anywhere by judicial decree. She hadn't noticed his arrival at Morris Elementary, only his lonely stance against that cinder brick wall. He got to Mansfield when his mom answered an ad for a secretary at a realtor's office. She got the job, and then she got the realtor 2 years later. So Steve lived with his mom during the week and went to his dad's in Fort Worth every other weekend. On the weeks that he was not at his dad's on the weekend, he was picked up from school by various family support personnel on Wednesday, spent that Wednesday night somewhere, and arrived back at school tired and stressed on Thursday morning. It took Sam until they were in middle school to understand this arrangement, but she never had been able to keep track of where Steve was and would be. At least he wasn't like poor Jacob Rovery. He lived out of suitcase. Since both of his parents were technically in the Mansfield School District, he spent 1 week at his mom's and then 1 week at his dad's. Sam could always tell if Jacob was with his mom or dad because his mom lived 5 minutes from the school. Those weeks, his hair was combed. His dad lived almost to the Fort Worth line, a good full 20 minutes away, 30 if traffic was bad. His hair was a total rat's nest on those weeks. But Steve's real problem was that Steve was just like his dad, the man his mother hated and divorced. Sam never heard Miss Green say one nice thing about Mr. Cully. Mr. Cully was a law professor at Texas Wesleyan University. It really irritated her that he quit private practice and started teaching right after their divorce. I know he did it so he could screw me out of money. I gave up years of my life trying to put that man through law school, and then he goes and teaches. How spiteful. Steve could really get her distracted when he wanted to. All he had to do was mention his dad. Sam wasn't really sure if any of that were true, But no one argued with Miss Green, not even Mr. Green, a very nice gentleman, 20 years her senior. Steve had a 5-year-old little sister who was currently the reigning Little Miss Texas princess. Steve had done the math one time between Arabella's birth date and the Greens' Las Vegas getaway weekend. He approached the question with his mother in a matter-of-fact, no-nonsense manner, and he asked her if Arabella was premature. When his mom asked why, he presented her with his calculations and promptly stayed grounded for a month. His dad had never remarried. After 10 years with Mrs. Green, Sam could see why. So this weekend was a Green weekend, and the Greens did not miss a Sunday at Walnut Creek Fellowship. Little Miss Texas Princess's manager had to network. Sam loved Steve, and because he was as big a misfit as Sam felt. She was so glad that she had approached him on that day in 3rd grade. He was always the logical friend, the tell it to her straight, and not what she wanted to hear friend. Besides, he always did his homework in case she needed to copy. That's an intriguing question. Sam knew Mr. Hart did not know Steve's name. Well, look, time's caught up to us today. Why don't we think on that theory and Brandon's ideas and pick up here next week? Class dismissed.